This week, there is no shortage of setups, ideas, and things to pay attention to if you are a currency trader or commodities trader, or heck, even an indices trader. Let's jump right into some ideas for the week ahead, starting with the trade that I'm already in. This is EURUSD. I still have a bearish bias on this pair and think that we do have some potential downside if you're watching this pair. Basically, the reason I took this trade was if we actually go to the 4-hour chart, you can see a little bit as to why I took the trade. We basically came up to an area of supply. Fairly simple idea here being basically that, okay, we're in a downward trend on the higher time frames. If we go into a continued risk on environment, generally I'm going to bet on the Canadian dollar in that aspect. If you saw my video yesterday, I talked about the S&P 500 and how I think it has potentially some more upside. And with that, my bias on this pair sort of shifts to the downside, because in a situation where we are betting on the euro or the Canadian dollar, I'd like to bet on the CAD in a market upswing, especially with oil prices going up. And that brings me to something for those of you guys who do trade the CAD. Pay attention to the prices of oil going up right now. It has some pressure on the Canadian dollar, as the Canadian dollar's economy, or the Canadian economy, is based largely around their export of oil. So keep that in tabs if you are looking at the oil market. With that said, I would like to take a look at where we generally begin our analysis, which is the US dollar. If you're a currency trader, you can't go very far before you start running into the DXY, the USD, whatever you'd like to call it. The DXY is just a currency index where we can get an idea of what the dollar is up to. And you can see, guys, that the momentum power upward trend that we saw on the dollar seems to have cracked for the time being. In fact, the simple moving averages that we have, it's just a 50 and a 20. So this is the 20, this is the 50. It's just showing us momentum here on the 4-hour. And what you can see is that we had over here just nothing but more upside coming. There was just no end in sight for the bulls until finally we started to put in a top here and started to reverse. Now we have the opposite scenario. It looks like the dollar is wanting to come down lower. In fact, we talked about 101 as a potential target, as well as 100 flat on the DXY itself. The reason we pointed that out is if you scroll out, you can kind of start to see where support begins to come back into play, at least in terms of like major levels of support that we, some highlight zones before we made this big run up on the dollar. You can see this big stretch happened right after the breakout right around here. So we would want to be paying attention to 101. That's a big psychological level, but so is 100 on the dot, which also happens to be another major level of support, as you can see right here. So in terms of like targets, I would actually say that this week I wouldn't be surprised to see if we get down to a level like 101 and 100. So going into this week, the bearish dollar thesis is still there. We're still saying, okay, the dollar looks like it has more downside to fall. Some of that steam has been blown, and now we're kind of just seeing a lot of people offload positions on the dollar, as well as just people going out of cash and back into some riskier assets like stocks and some of the more aggressive currency pairs. Speaking of which, now that we've got an idea on the dollar, let's go look at some of the other ones out there. A big one, of course, that comes to mind is the pound USD, which has seen a little bit of a momentum shift to the upside. And going into this week, the question becomes, does this thing have more upside, or is it just going to get rolled over? Is it going to get sold into on a pullback here? Now, granted, I think that the dollar has more room to fall, as I mentioned. And so when we start looking at this in terms of like a longer term setup, yeah, I think that there may be potentially some pound weakness and the dollar kind of comes back once we get truly a nice pullback. But that leaves us, you guys, with a good spread of potential upside for the pound, especially for a 1-week basis. It's very possible that we could see a nice rally on up to a level like 1.30. And just taking advantage of that shorter term momentum could give us some nice setups. So let's look at the 1-hour chart here and talk a little bit about what happened next week, as well as some ideas for this week. So one thing that I like in the bullish case for pound USD is that we've been seeing some higher lows, like pretty consistently, right? Each time prices pulled back, we've seen buyers step in and push this thing off the lows. So if you're watching pound USD, we could potentially look for more upside here, especially with knowing that 1.30 seems like a reasonable place of past resistance that we could be headed to. So we have plenty of room to work with. Okay, so one major area here in terms of resistance is the previous topping point here. If you're a momentum trader like myself, what I'd be looking at for a scenario like this would be to see if we can get something like a break past this level this week and any sort of retracement, looking for continuation plays on pound USD. Now, pound USD is not actually my favorite pound pair to trade. We'll take a look at that in just a second. But just note, again, we're just going with this momentum here that we're seeing. If it does break the other direction, if things change, then we may need to adjust and react accordingly. But for now, I see nice little bullish continuation opportunities. And to me, it would be, break and retests as kind of a primary looking for setup there. You could make the argument that, you could look for support at pullbacks to these areas, which if you're very bullish, perhaps that actually could be a good setup as well. Generally, what I do when I talk about setups is I talk about both directions. If I'm bullish on something, right, where would a pullback buy look like? Well, perhaps around here. And what about a breakout and continuation? Well, perhaps up here. And the reason I point out both is because then you can kind of set up a scenario for each one and sort of just watch the charts as the market goes open, and you could look for stuff like this, right? So you're just sort of setting up the scenario where if it breaks out and we just jump into, the upside and things are very strong, right? That first scenario that we talked about, we could look for some continuation plays. And as long as we get a good technical entry and we ride some of that, I think the risk to reward could be really, really good. So pound USD is one that I'm watching, but I mentioned that there's another pair that I really, really like, which is pound yen. So we'll take a look at GJ. So GJ looks even better to me for potential upside. I mentioned this in yesterday's video. Pound yen is one that I am looking at. By the way, you guys, any trades that I end up actually taking, I share them inside of our private Discord. In fact, let me show you. So here's a trade I mentioned. I mentioned earlier that I traded 𝗀𝗧𝗏𝗏 last week. Well, here's the trade, right? I shared the full breakdown. So my entry, my stop loss, my target, my trade analysis, the edge finder analysis that I do, which is our proprietary software. As you can see here, it was showing up as a strong sell, which helped me look for the setup itself. And then, last week I moved my stops to break even on it. So every trade that I share the full breakdown inside of our Discord channel. If you would like to join that Discord channel, there will be a link down below in the description. And we're doing a sale right now on the, sorry, I just blanked out the screen. We're doing a sale on the membership. So down below in the description, you'll see a link to click that and join the VIP. And if you use the promo code down there, YTVIP at checkout, you're going to get 30% off of any of our memberships. I would highly encourage you, if you've been thinking about it, this is your chance to get in for a cheap price. Use that code, punch it in there, come trade with us, come join the chat room, meet some traders from around the world. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. We have people and traders sharing ideas from all around the world. Ivan is in Kenya. Patrick is in Germany. Frank and I are in the US. We have people in Australia who do stuff. So there's just all sorts of stuff. So come join us. If you haven't already joined the VIP, you get access to trade alerts. You get access to our coaching webinars, our chat rooms, and so much more. We'd love to meet you. Use that promo code, get that 30% off, and see you inside of the group. One of the ones that I'm watching for this week the most is pound yen. In fact, it is probably top of my watch list for potential buys, especially if we can get a clean break above 160.50. Okay, I'm looking for this. This week is one of my predominantly favorite setups. If we can get any momentum, I think that we have potential to make a move back to the previous highs here and perhaps even beyond. As if we scroll out, you can see there is more upside potential here for the pound yen, at least in my opinion. So we're talking about 164 as a potential target, 161.80. And then, of course, if things got crazy bullish again, if we saw a massive run up, which I think is not super likely, but very still possible, we would be looking at a move at the previous high all the way at 168. So if risk on truly comes into play, and that's what this rides on, you guys, is risk on, meaning people willing to take risk and go for more aggressive assets in the market, things like stocks, things like GJ, right? More aggressive markets, pairs, currencies, etc. So anyway, something like this I like a lot for potential setups this week. I will definitely be watching this, and if I do take a trade, like I said, it will be going inside of the Discord channel where I share all of my positions. But key starting point would be to see a break of this level at 160.60. If we can get a clear of this area, like a green candle outside of that to start the week, etc., I will be looking for any retracement to this zone for potential buys and continuation plays on the pound against the yen. So top setup for me definitely this week. Another one that is everyone's talking about Euro USD, right? Is the euro going to go higher? And last week we had a lot of bullishness from the euro, and partially it was from the ECB. I believe there was a statement where they believe the euro will strengthen. They're talking about rate hikes. And this one is interesting, you guys, because you might be saying, well, Nick, you know, they're going to rate hike, but they're way behind the other ones. And that I would agree with you. But remember that sometimes you get this scenario where the market like overshoots, right? They're like, oh, the euro dollar, like the euro is so trash compared to the other ones. Whereas, you know, when there is some good news, it's like, wait a second, how bad really is it? And then there's a sympathy move. There's a pullback play, a little bit of a rally. Even if longer term, I think the euro dollar is going down, there may be some shorter term interest, if that makes sense. So if we're looking at this thing, I think that the euro dollar has some upside. I'm still not super convinced in terms of like being a bull. I'm not a bull on the euro right now. Personally, I still think this thing is you know, more sell favored. I still would personally side with the USD, but perhaps as a seller, we're going to get some better interesting setups. And what I mean by that is longer term, maybe we're going to see on the daily chart a swing back to 1.09, maybe even up to 111, right? So when I'm looking at this, I'm saying, okay, well, I'm not going to jump in front of it right now, but perhaps once it starts getting up into some zones where I can see some great longer-term continuation plays, there may be some longer-term swing trades that we could set up looking at Euro USD. In fact, like I mentioned, a couple levels that I like are 1.1150, let's call it, and then up here at 1.09, let's say. So just a couple ideas there for those of you guys who trade Euro USD. Another one is dollar yen. Everyone has been paying attention to this massive trend that seems to sort of be shorting out, seems to be coming to a close here. And I think that's probably healthy. I think we're probably headed for a retracement down to this zone on the dollar yen. I think that in terms of the dollar yen, you're seeing this big, massive move to the upside, right? We saw just a huge rise on the dollar. The yen just was no bueno. People were just selling the yen, buying the dollar over and over and over. And so, you know, that story is good until it's good. And then when it's sort of it ends, it can end kind of ugly. And I think that, you know, just from a macro, longer term daily chart perspective, I think a 50% retracement is pretty healthy, especially after a move like that. So keep an eye on that. I mean, once you get down there, perhaps there's some buys, but for me, shorter term, the dollar yen is more of a sell than anything else. There's other pairs I'd be more preferable towards trading, if I wanted to short USD, but the dollar yen, for those of you guys who trade it, you can see just a regimented, this is what we talk about, is just like consistent selling of rallies. And that seems to be the case on a lot of the USD crosses, right? Right now we see that this one just consistently has sell interest out there. And I think that, you know, if you're looking at this thing from a bearish perspective, one of the key spots I would say this week would be to see a break of this support zone. So I'll go ahead and make this green. So what I'm saying is that this area here was sort of like the line in the sand last week. If you see a break underneath that, you may get another flush to the downside, and there may be some trading opportunities to the downside this week if you're kind of going with the flow. Now, if you're waiting for more of a pullback, if you're more of just like, I'm just going to wait for a pullback in this trend, you know, maybe you're willing to sell a quick pop up into this zone if you are bearish. But again, I think that either ways, for now, the risk to reward preference for me would be to the short side, looking at dollar yen with stops above highs, targets potentially at the bottom here. But really, I think that if you're really short bias in the dollar yen, you've got to be open to the idea of a flush back down to the 50% retracement that we discussed, which we can mark as kind of like this area here, this area here. So if you're really thinking that, okay, yeah, we probably have more downside, if you would tend to agree with that, to this downward trend, then the risk to reward starts to get pretty incredible. I mean, you could even widen your stop if you're more of a swing trader. You know, if you're just looking for something like this, might be worth paying attention to. But yeah, that's my take on dollar yen. Some people have been asking me, you know, why I haven't been trading dollar yen so much. It's kind of because like this, I sort of got like I caught my trade. So I'll show you guys. Look, I traded dollar yen. This was one of my best trades of my entire year here in 2022. It's hard to see here, but I am logged into my broker, and check this out. I bought 115,000 units. That's 1.15 lots. And I held that baby all the way up to, you can actually, it's hard to see, but let me zoom in. You can see where my position closed out was right here on dollar yen. Sold 150,000. I think that was like it was like a $3,000 or $4,000 trade, and that was just on this one account. I trade a couple different accounts simultaneously, and that was just insane. That was like one of the best moves that I've ever caught in the currency market. Sure, granted, I shoulda, coulda, woulda just kept holding because I would have made another $3,000 or $4,000 on the next move. But and then another $3,000 or $4,000 in the next move, and then maybe another $3,000 or $4,000. Of course, you could play that game all day long, but. Now I think that train has sort of left the station. I sort of got less and less attracted to it when it just started shooting just straight up and not much of a pullback. I knew that, at some point that trend is going to end, and I would rather pick it up earlier in the trend than trying to chase it towards the end, if that makes sense. I mean, no one knows exactly when the end is, but I just think that the trend becomes less and less attractive as it gets late in the phase of a trend. So anyways, dollar yen is another one. Aussie dollar, maybe worth talking about today for the risk on people. You have a breakout here that happened last week, which was pretty big for the bulls. If you are willing to sort of be aggressive, there perhaps is a pullback buy that could come into play there. If we scroll out here and get an idea for this next week where we could go, you've got this swing high. Very, very possible that price would like to retest that area. And then, of course, that previous pivot high at 74.50. So if you're looking at that, you have a really interesting little perspective where that downward trend seems to have cracked a little bit, right? If you just, I'm not a huge trend line person, but if you draw a trend line here, you can kind of see that downward structure, that trajectory definitely has been compromised with this recent price action. So to me, what that says is that it seems like we're in the early phase of a new trend here on Aussie dollar, and that we could perhaps be seeing a move on up to this area here. So perhaps pullback buys could give you scenarios where the risk to reward becomes pretty dang good, both on the swing trading or if you're more on the day trading side of things. I like the idea of putting stops at least below something like this. This big candle was really strong, so I wouldn't want to see that get erased, right? So I wouldn't want to see like that would not be cool. But something like this, I could see potentially looking for an entry on Aussie dollar and riding that to that previous swing high that we marked on the higher time frames. So definitely an interesting one for me, Aussie dollar. That would be one that's on my watch list as well. Perhaps something I'll pay attention to a little bit more this week. Guys, remember we're doing a huge sale on memberships. Come join the action. You'll be able to trade with us, share thoughts, and meet other people here. Also, we added something kind of cool where people can share their trade ideas. And look at this. You can actually get feedback. So, for example, Private Cannon Fodder, one of our regulars, very nice guy. He actually shared a idea on pound Aussie, and then he actually can get feedback from people on whether or not they agree with the trade idea, which is something that we just added. It makes for a really, really nice complimentary, sort of like, okay, if you have an idea, share it with the group, and we'll give you some feedback. Well, people will let you know if they think it's a good idea and if they don't agree with you. And that's kind of the purpose of having a community. Since day one, it's always been about idea exchange. And of course, you can jump in the chat room as well and chat it out. But you can also see the trades being taken by myself in isolation, or Frank is another one. He was trading S&P 500 a lot last week. That's kind of his specialty. So if you like the indices, he's out there doing that. You can also see Patrick. He's one of our traders as well. Focuses a lot on currency pairs and stocks. And then of course, Ivan, the regular, right? You guys know Ivan if you watch my channel long enough. He's a good friend of mine and one of our members inside of the group. So please, if you're very serious about your trading and you would like to take advantage of our 30% off sale, please use it today. It's your chance to do so for a better price than you're going to get for a long time. So we invite you to come join the action and be a part of our squad. Thanks very much for watching today. Trade safe, you guys. Have a great week.